Big Shaq pulled up calm, but walked in like a storm. Sterling Motors denied the test drive, thought they were brushing off just another face. But when the owner realized who just got told no, the dealership froze like time itself. You don't deny greatness and walk away unchanged. This wasn't just a mistake, it was a moment they'll never forget. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. It was one of those golden Los Angeles mornings, the kind that makes you feel like the world might just go your way. Shaquille O'Neal, known to most as Big Shaq, sat behind the wheel of his matte black Escalade, cruising slow through the streets he grew up loving. The city buzzed with its usual rhythm, horns, music, footsteps blending into a track that only the streets could compose. Shaq wasn't in a rush. He rarely was these days. Time had become something he respected, not something he fought. He had just wrapped a youth basketball charity event the night before. Hundreds of kids, dozens of volunteers, and that Big Shaq grin lighting up the whole gym. But this morning was his time. No cameras, no press. Just Shaq, a hoodie pulled low over his head, and some classic Earth, Wind and Fire humming from the speakers. He had that rare look in his eye, peaceful but not without weight. The kind of peace that only comes from years of being misunderstood, judged, and finally settling into the calm of knowing who you really are. As he passed through Crenshaw, windows down, he nodded to a few locals who recognized him even without the flash and lights. A woman waved from a corner flower stand. "Big Shaq," she called out, grinning. He smiled and gave her that slow two-finger salute. A group of teens on bikes shouted his name, but he just kept moving, cool and grounded. That was his energy now, not retired, just rewired. He stopped near his favorite soul food spot. The smell of fried catfish and cornbread floated out onto the sidewalk. Stepping out, Shaq towered over the crowd, like a monument of lived history. But he moved with the gentleness of a man who'd seen enough storms to know when to keep the skies calm. He grabbed a plate to go, talked a little with the chef, who insisted on charging him this time. "You ain't a charity case, big man." Which made Shaq laugh in that deep, contagious way of his. As he ate off the back of his car, someone approached. A young father with his daughter. No autograph asked. No selfie begged. Just a handshake, a thank you. Shaq nodded. The moment exchanged without fanfare, as if both men understood something unspoken, about being seen in a world that sometimes looks right through you. Then something caught his eye up the street. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even flashy in the usual sense. But it had presence. A brand new luxury dealership that hadn't been there a month ago. Glass walls that reflected the blue sky too perfectly. White floors so polished they looked like ice. A steel nameplate glimmering in the sun. Sterling Motors. The place screamed exclusivity. Not just in what it sold, but in who it silently invited in. Shaq squinted at the building from behind his sunglasses. It wasn't the cars that caught him. It was the vibe. That quiet, coded kind of place that some folks walk into and immediately feel like they don't belong. He'd known that feeling before. Not in the NBA, not in broadcasting, but in the world beneath the suits and sponsorships. The world that asked questions with its eyes before you ever spoke a word. He didn't need a new car. Lord knows he had more than enough. Ferraris, Teslas, Bentleys, you name it. But something about this dealership pulled him. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was instinct. Or maybe it was the simple urge to see how the world would treat him when they didn't recognize the name on his face. He finished the last bite of his cornbread, wiped his hands on a napkin, and climbed back into the Escalade. Slow drive towards Sterling Motors. As he approached, he noticed the way the building sat, like it was guarding something, like it dared you to approach it wrong. Shaq rolled down his sleeves, glanced at his reflection in the glass. No designer chains today. Just a gray hoodie, dark jeans, and sneakers. Low-key as ever. Pulling into the lot, he parked near the front but not right at the door. It wasn't a power move. It was a habit. Always make space for someone else who thinks they matter more. As he stepped out, a few heads inside turned. Not with recognition, just curiosity. A large man, alone, unannounced. No clipboard, no suit, no reason, in their minds to be here. He walked slow toward the entrance. The automatic doors slid open with a hiss, and the coldness of the showroom wrapped around him. White lights overhead. Chrome accents everywhere. Not a speck of dust in sight. It was the kind of place that smelled like money. Not cash, but the kind you only see on contracts and bank wires. Inside, Shaq paused. He looked around like he was taking in an art gallery. Not a car lot. A silver convertible shimmered under a spotlight. A coupe in matte navy sat like royalty in the corner. These weren't just cars. These were statements. Dreams with price tags so big, they came without commas. A woman behind the front desk gave him a glance, and then looked away too fast, too dismissive. A salesman leaned against a pillar, speaking softly to a man in loafers and a Rolex. Another associate passed near Shaq, offered a polite but hollow "Can I help you?" without slowing down. Shaq didn't mind. Not yet. He walked further in, gravitating toward a deep graphite SUV with jet black rims. Clean lines. Aggressive stance. The kind of car that didn't just move, it made you move when you saw it. He ran a hand across the hood, almost smiling. Behind him, he caught faint murmurs. Two of the staff whispering. One shrugged. The other gave a small shake of the head. The message was clear, even if the words weren't. Wrong vibe, wrong look, wrong man. Shaq exhaled slowly and looked up at the security camera blinking above the main entrance. He'd been watched his whole life. On the court. Off the court. In good faith and bad. But this was different. This wasn't curiosity. This was caution. And it was getting louder. He moved toward the front desk. The receptionist's smile was thin, professional. "Can I help you?" Shaq nodded gently. "Just looking," he said. Her reply was stiff. "Of course. Let us know if you need anything." Then she looked past him, literally to a couple that had just walked in behind him. Their handshake got warmth. Their greeting got sparkle. Shaq got silence. He turned back to the graphite SUV. Stood there a moment longer. Watching. Waiting. Listening to the soft echo of steps on marble tile. The cars sat in perfect rows like kings on thrones. But something about the place felt hollow. Like it wasn't just selling luxury. It was guarding it. Shaq knew better than to speak when silence said enough. He didn't call out the looks. Didn't snap back at the whispers. He just stood still, watching the light catch the edge of the car's fender. That's when the feeling hit him. The same one he'd had years ago. When a hotel valet ignored him and went straight to his lighter-skinned friend. The same one he felt when he walked through airports and saw people clutch their bags a little tighter. The world had changed, but not everywhere. Not here. Not in this showroom. He stepped back from the SUV, looked around one last time, and turned toward the exit. As he walked, the receptionist called out weakly, "Have a nice day." Shaq didn't respond. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. As he walked through the automatic doors again, the sun hit his face and reminded him who he was. Not a name tag. Not a paycheck. Not someone waiting to be accepted. Just Shaquille O'Neal, son of Lucille, father, legend, and man. Behind him, the doors hissed closed. He didn't need a car. But the dealership? It needed something it didn't even know it was missing. And the story hadn't even started yet. Sterling Motors sat at the corner of Melrose and Jackson, like it didn't belong to the rest of the world. The building itself was a statement. Towering glass panels kissed by sunlight, brushed steel logos, shining like metals, and spotless imported tile leading to a fleet of cars so polished, they looked like they hadn't even touched air yet. It wasn't just a dealership, it was a fortress for the elite, dressed up as a showroom. Nothing about it whispered. It all shouted wealth, status, exclusivity. The kind of place where champagne was served before contracts were signed, and where you needed a certain kind of look just to be offered water. Shaquille O'Neal pulled up slow, unbothered, eyes scanning the scene. He wasn't here to prove anything. He didn't need to. The man had championship rings, a doctorate, global fame, and a smile that had melted the toughest interviewers. But today he came without that. No suits, no security detail, just a hoodie, sneakers, and a quiet vibe. This wasn't a test for him, it was one for the world around him. And some days, that world still failed miserably. As he parked the Escalade in a corner spot, deliberately away from the spotlight, he noticed the symmetry of everything. The cars outside were staged like artwork, their angles too perfect to be accidental. The glass facade caught the sun at just the right tilt, like it was made to blind you into respect. He could already feel the difference in temperature, how the world shifted just walking into places like this. How your worth was silently calculated before you spoke a word. Shaq stepped out, stretched slightly, and glanced once at the entrance before making his way in. No phone in hand. No appointment. No ego. Just curiosity. Maybe it was the graphite SUV he'd seen from the street that caught his eye. Or maybe it was something deeper. Some places pull you in just so you can learn something about the people inside them. The automatic doors opened with a mechanical sigh, and as Shaq stepped into the showroom, it was like walking into a different kind of silence. Not peaceful, controlled, calculated, the kind of quiet that watched you, judged you, before your footsteps even touched the marble floor. The air was cool, with a faint scent of new leather and something vaguely floral, probably piped in through invisible vents to make you feel like you were in a perfume ad instead of a dealership. His eyes scanned the space. Sleek chrome furniture, digital panels displaying car specs, luxury accessories on display behind glass cases, like museum artifacts. Each car sat on its own platform, like royalty awaiting worship. The lighting was cinematic. The whole place had been designed to impress, to intimidate, and above all, to filter. It didn't scream racism, but it didn't have to. It whispered exclusion with every polished edge. At first, nobody approached him. A receptionist at the front desk looked up, her eyes lingering just a second too long before darting away. She said nothing, not even a greeting. A well-dressed couple a few feet away were instantly offered drinks and brochured. A young sales associate practically floated over to them, teeth gleaming, voice smooth as butter. Shaq took his time, walking past a midnight blue sports coupe with red leather interior. It was beautiful, but he wasn't here for a car. He was here to see how this place handled a man who didn't announce his presence. Still, no one came. He moved to the graphite SUV. Sleek, sharp angles. A design that demanded attention. He stood by it, admiring the detailing on the rims, the deep tint of the windows. It was the kind of car that looked like it drove through storms untouched. For a moment he imagined himself behind the wheel, not for the thrill of it, but for the quiet command it would give him. Just then a voice behind him. Curt. Not rude, but not warm either. Can I help you with something? Shaq turned. A man in his early 40s stood there, blazer just tight enough to show off his gym habits, hair slicked back like he spent more time styling than selling. His tone was neutral, but his eyes scanned Shaq in that way, the once-over that wasn't curiosity, but evaluation, sizing him up, deciding how much time to waste. Shaq smiled politely. Just looking, he replied. The salesman nodded stiffly. Let me know if you need anything. He didn't offer a name. Didn't stay. Just turned and walked away, glancing briefly at the receptionist with a look that said, not a buyer. Shaq stayed by the SUV for another minute, running a finger along the side mirror, thinking. He wasn't offended. Not yet. He was observant. Every interaction here felt cautious, performative, like the staff had trained for a particular kind of client, and he wasn't. He wasn't wearing a watch worth flexing. He wasn't name-dropping anyone. To them he was just a big guy with a soft voice and no credentials in sight. He wandered further into the showroom, stopping near a white convertible with Italian leather seats. As he admired the craftsmanship, he caught snippets of conversation. Not the right fit, someone muttered from behind a column. Probably just browsing, another said. They walk in sometimes. Never serious buyers. Shaq didn't flinch. He'd heard worse, but it was the assumption that hit hardest. Not the words themselves, but the comfort with which they were spoken. Like it was common sense to doubt him. Eventually a younger staff member, early 20s, maybe an intern, approached him. Awkward but sincere. Hey, if you want to take a closer look at anything, I can grab the key cards. Shaq appreciated the effort. He nodded. That SUV back there, clean design. Can it be test-driven? The young man hesitated. Let me check with my manager. He disappeared toward the back office, and Shaq watched him go, already knowing how this would play out. He'd seen this scene too many times. It was never about the car. It was about the idea of who they thought deserved access. A minute later, the manager emerged. Same guy from before, blazer and slick hair. He approached Shaq with a tightened smile. Apologies, sir. That particular model isn't available for test drives at the moment. It's reserved for a client pickup this afternoon. Shaq didn't blink. What about the other one in black? Same model. The manager hesitated.
That one's technically part of our showroom display. We'd need advanced scheduling for a test drive. Insurance reasons.
There it was. Excuse after excuse. Polished like the floors. It wasn't about policy. It was about perception. He wasn't the customer they wanted behind their wheel. The man who could buy the dealership in cash if he wanted to, was being told without being told that he didn't belong. Shaq gave a small nod. Eyes steady. All good. He turned slowly, made his way toward the exit. As he passed the front desk, the receptionist looked up again. This time, she offered a quick, awkward smile, too late, too forced. Outside, the sun was still shining, the street humming with life. But Shaq stood still for a beat, letting the coldness of that showroom fall off his shoulders like dust. He looked back once. They hadn't recognized him. They didn't see a man who had changed lives, built schools, saved families, created jobs. They didn't see the MVP, the businessman, the father, the icon. All they saw was a man walking in alone, without the markers they trusted. So they locked the gates without even knowing they had. But what they also didn't know was who was about to walk in next. Because sometimes, the real story doesn't start when you enter the room. It begins when you walk out. The air inside Sterling Motors hadn't warmed up a degree since Shaq first stepped through those glass doors. It still held that dry, sterile chill, the kind that seeped beneath your clothes and clung to your skin, the kind that said you're being watched. But even more than that, it whispered you don't belong here. And yet Shaq stood still, grounded like a redwood in the center of a storm, unmoved by the temperature or the eyes. He wasn't angry. He was patient. But under that patience, something quieter simmered, something heavier. He circled the graphite SUV once more, taking in the aggressive design, the quiet power it radiated, the way it seemed built not just for roads but for statements. It wasn't just a car. It was a boundary line. And standing on one side of it, Shaq knew exactly what he was testing. Not the horsepower, not the engine, the system, the people. He turned slowly and caught the eye of the young intern who had offered help earlier. The kid stood awkwardly by a pillar, half glancing, half hoping he wouldn't get pulled back into something. But Shaq raised a hand, small gesture, nothing dramatic, just an, "Hey," Shaq said, his tone calm but direct. "Is this model available for test drives?" Before the intern could respond, the slick-haired manager reappeared from a side hallway like he'd been monitoring the situation the entire time. He walked toward them with practiced confidence, that customer service smile stretching across his face like a mask. "I can help you with that," he said quickly, stepping between Shaq and the intern. Shaq nodded once. "Appreciate it. I'm interested in that one." He pointed at the SUV. The manager tilted his head as if surprised, then put his hands in his pockets. "Unfortunately, that model isn't available for test drives at the moment," he said, not breaking eye contact. Shaq's eyes narrowed slightly, not in threat, but in recognition. He had heard this tone before, in meetings, in real estate offices, on golf courses. It was the voice that disguised gatekeeping behind bureaucracy. He didn't move, didn't speak, just waited for more. The manager continued. "It's actually being prepped for a scheduled pickup later today. One of our returning clients. I'd love to show you the interior, though. Beautiful detail work." Shaq's voice remained low and steady. "Got it. What about the black one on the side? Same model, different trim." The manager blinked, hesitated for a half second. That was the tell. "That one, that's technically part of our floor showcase. It's not in rotation for test drives. We'd have to set an appointment. Usually takes a few days to process." Shaq smiled faintly, just enough to let him know he'd heard the rhythm. He looked past the manager, scanning the floor. In the 15 minutes he'd been inside, he had watched 3 different customers, 2 men and 1 woman, walk in, ask about models, and get immediate smiling offers of test drives. One of them had already left with a sales associate, keys in hand, engine purring as they pulled off the lot. "All right," Shaq said simply, no trace of challenge in his tone. The manager's smile tightened like he wasn't sure if he'd won something, or just stepped into the wrong kind of spotlight. Shaq turned to glance again at the SUV. He didn't need the keys. He didn't need the engine to roar. Everything he needed to know about this place had already been said, just not in words. As he moved to walk away, the manager spoke again, a bit more upbeat, trying to cover ground. "We have some sedans that are available right now. Still luxury class, still top performance. Great offers too." Shaq didn't look back. Not interested. The pause that followed was thick, and for a moment, it felt like the room got even quieter. The receptionist didn't make eye contact. A few other customers on the floor glanced over, sensing something they couldn't quite name. He walked toward the door with the same slow, confident pace he entered with. But his mind wasn't quiet. It never was, not in places like this. Because even when you're calm, even when you're a giant who's mastered peace, disrespect doesn't slide off easy. It settles somewhere deeper, like sediment in the gut. He reached the front of the building just as the sun poured through the glass, warm and blinding in contrast to the cold inside. One step into the light, and he paused. Not for effect, for clarity. Inside, the manager turned toward the receptionist and whispered something too low to hear. But Shaq didn't need to hear it. He already knew. These kinds of conversations didn't need volume to be understood. They were built into posture, into timing, into who got offered keys and who got handed excuses. For a brief second, he looked back through the glass. The same SUV sat there, untouched, unbothered, waiting. Not just for a driver, but for a moment, for a reckoning. He stepped outside, pulled his hoodie up against the breeze. As he moved toward his Escalade, a different kind of car pulled into the lot. A sleek, deep black luxury SUV. It rolled in smooth, tinted windows, catching the light like they were holding secrets. Shaq didn't recognize it yet, but soon that arrival would turn everything upside down. He stood by his car for a moment, keys in hand, and let his shoulders relax. Still no anger, just understanding. Another page in a long, worn book. A voice called from across the lot. Sharp, confident, and familiar. "Shaq, is that you?" He turned. Recognition sparked. But that's for later. Right now the scene was still settling, still holding on to that last breath before the shift. The test drive hadn't happened. The car hadn't moved. But something far heavier had. And it had all started with 4 simple words. "Sorry, sir, you can't. Now you can't afford it. No, you don't qualify. Just you can't." Sometimes that's all it takes to show how far we still have to go. When Shaq stepped outside Sterling Motors, and the glass doors whispered shut behind him, it wasn't just a man exiting a building. It was the quiet retreat of someone who had once again been misread, misplaced and boxed into a version of himself far too small to contain the truth. The air outside was warmer, full of light and traffic, and the sounds of the city moving with indifference. But inside Shaq's chest, something still sat heavy. Not anger, but that particular kind of weight that builds when dignity is dented, not in public explosions but in private, polite refusals. No cameras followed him, no reporters asked for statements, no one ran to stop him, and that was the most telling part. In their world, the polished, curated world behind that glass, he was just another tall man in a hoodie, who didn't look like money someone who came without an appointment, didn't drop a name, didn't demand attention. A shadow passing through. He leaned against the Escalade, arms crossed, and exhaled. Deep, controlled. He stared back at the building, not in defiance, but in calculation, the way a man looks at a place after it tells him who he's allowed to be within its walls. It wasn't the first time, it likely wouldn't be the last, but each time still carved a little deeper than the last. Inside the showroom, the rhythm hadn't changed. Sales associates returned to their routines. High fives over sales closed. Laughter between clients. Lattes served in glass mugs like status was something you could sip. But one person hadn't moved. The intern name was Laya. A college junior finishing a summer program in luxury automotive management. Her first step into a world she hadn't yet decided she belonged in. She had watched the whole interaction play out from behind a digital console where she was supposed to be inputting inventory specs, but nothing she'd seen on the screen had her attention. It was what she saw in the room. The way everyone stiffened when the man walked in. The way her manager's face tightened. How he offered a test drive to the couple behind the velvet ropes just minutes before. But not to him. The way the receptionist had looked over him. Literally, like he was blocking her view of someone more important. Lila didn't know much yet about the rules of sales, but she knew bias when she saw it. Even if it came dressed in tailored blazers and fake smiles. And something about that man. Something lingered. His voice had been soft but sure. His movements carried the ease of someone who didn't need to prove anything. His sighs filled the room, but it was his silence that stuck with her, like he had chosen stillness on purpose, to let the space trip over its own assumptions. She watched him now through the glass, still standing by the SUV outside, unmoving. The reflection on the glass turned him into a silhouette, a legend in outline, erased by misunderstanding. Meanwhile, inside the manager, Kyle kept pacing. His voice dropped low when he spoke to the other senior sales associate. "I'm telling you, he looked familiar. Like I've seen him somewhere." Yeah, the associate smirked. Maybe from one of those reality courtroom shows. He got that ex-football energy. Kyle scoffed but didn't correct him. They both laughed. Lila's jaw clenched. Not out of fear, out of shame. Secondhand shame. And confusion. How could they not know? Even if they didn't follow basketball. Even if they didn't watch television. The man's face was stamped across American culture. Commercials. Business ventures. Charities. Kids' programs. He was everywhere. But maybe that was the problem. People only saw what they expected. And in a hoodie without cameras or a PR team, Shaquille O'Neal wasn't Shaquille O'Neal to them. He was just tall, black, and unaccompanied, which to some meant unimportant. Outside, Shaq adjusted the sleeves of his hoodie and took out his phone, not to text, not to post, just to check the time. His fingers hovered a second over a message draft. He started typing but paused, deleted, then simply put the phone back in his pocket. This wasn't going on social media. This wasn't a moment to go viral. This was personal. At that moment, the front doors opened behind him. He didn't turn, but he heard the shoes approach, leather soles clicking fast, not sprinting, but full of purpose. He waited for the voice before looking. "Sir?" came a breathy call. It wasn't Kyle. It wasn't a sales associate. It was Lila. Nervous, unsure, but standing in her decision. Shaq turned slightly, raised a brow, nothing hostile, just wait. She cleared her throat. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for how that played out in there." Shaq held her gaze, calm, steady. "How? What played out?" Lila hesitated, then shook her head. "All of it. The way they assumed, the excuses. You didn't deserve that." Shaq didn't nod. He didn't correct her. He just let her words hang in the air until they landed where they needed to. "Thanks," he finally said. "But I didn't come for respect. I came to see who still needed a reason to give it." Lila blinked. Something about the way he said it hit harder than it should have. And then just like that he turned and stepped back toward his vehicle. But as he reached for the door handle, a long black SUV pulled into the lot. Its windows were tinted dark, its body spotless like it had just rolled out of a movie set. The vehicle slowed and parked diagonally across two spaces near the dealership entrance. No one moved at first. Then the driver's door opened. Out stepped a man in a navy suit. Crisp white shirt, gold cufflinks that glinted when he moved. His presence was unmistakable, not because he was famous, but because he walked like he knew what every square foot of this dealership cost to build. The kind of walk that said ownership. James Carrington, CEO and founder of Sterling Motors. A man whose name was on contracts, not desks. He only showed up when something serious happened. A PR shoot, a VIP deal, or an emergency. Today, it was something else. James adjusted his sunglasses and took a few steps before he froze. He locked eyes with Shaq, and something in his expression shifted, recognition crashing into his face like a freight train. "Shaquille?" he said, voice rising with disbelief and dread. Shaq turned slowly, lips neutral. No reaction, no smile, just that quiet stare, the one that said "You're late." James stepped forward, removing his glasses. I didn't know you were here. No one told me. You weren't supposed to know," Shaq cut in, voice even. Inside the dealership, Kyle noticed the interaction through the glass, and frowned. The moment his eyes saw James walking toward Shaq, not just walking, but crossing the lot to reach him, something in Kyle's gut dropped. He looked at his coworker. "Who the hell is that guy?" The coworker shrugged. Then James clapped Shaq lightly on the shoulder and said with a guilty chuckle, "You know, I would have had the red carpet out if someone had told me you were dropping by." Shaq didn't answer right away. Instead, he nodded once toward the building. "They treated me like a stranger." James's smile wavered. "They didn't know," he said weakly. "That's the point," Shaq replied. For a full second, no one spoke. The street noise faded behind the weight of that pause. James straightened his jacket, glancing toward the glass wall of the dealership. He saw the staff frozen behind it, watching, realizing. He turned back to Shaq, trying to recalibrate. "Let me make it right." Shaq's eyes didn't blink. "You can't make it right with me. I'm not the one losing something." The sentence hung there, quiet and full of thunder. James sighed, shook his head. "Come back in. Let's talk." Shaq didn't move. Maybe later. He opened his door and slid into the driver's seat, without another word. The engine purred to life with a deep, expensive growl. And as the vehicle pulled away, leaving James standing alone in the lot, the mood inside Sterling Motors shifted from curated calm to creeping dread. They hadn't just disrespected a celebrity. They'd failed a test. The kind of test that didn't measure sales skills or polish. It measured humanity, and someone had just flunked it in front of the man who wrote the gradebook. The sound of tires easing onto the sun-warmed pavement cut through the tension, like a whisper with sharp edges. As Shaq reached his Escalade, hand brushing the handle, the low growl of a high-performance engine rolled up behind him. It wasn't loud. It was deliberate, the kind of arrival that didn't need to announce itself because the world already knew to look. The black SUV slid into the lot like a predator claiming its territory, sleek and menacing in the way only money and taste could combine. Shaq didn't turn around immediately. He heard the doors unlock with a subtle chirp, then the unmistakable click of polished shoes meeting concrete. The steps were smooth, confident, and unhurried. Whoever was behind that SUV walked like they owned the pavement, because in a way, they probably did. From behind the tinted glass doors of Sterling Motors, eyes widened. The front desk receptionist dropped her tablet. Kyle, the smug sales manager, stiffened like a student caught cheating. Even the intern, Laya, leaned forward, pulse ticking as if she knew something rare was about to detonate in real time. The man who stepped out of the SUV was tall, fit, dressed in a navy blue suit, tailored so perfectly, it looked like it had been poured onto him. His shoes were black leather, no scuffs. His tie was silk, deep crimson. But it wasn't the clothes that commanded the moment. It was his face. The calm intensity of a man who had built empires brick by brick and didn't need to flex a single one. James Carrington, owner of Sterling Motors, wasn't a man people questioned, unless they wanted to leave unemployed. And yet, when his eyes landed on Shaquille O'Neal, standing in silence beside a matte black Escalade, his entire posture changed. His walk slowed, his jaw slackened just enough to betray the surprise. And then came the words, the kind that ripple through glass and concrete like a grenade in a library. "Is that the Shaquille O'Neal?" James said it not in the tone of a man confirming a celebrity sighting, but with the hesitant, cold realization of someone seeing a missed opportunity already slipping away. Shaq finally turned his head, expression unreadable. He didn't smile. He didn't nod like he was impressed by the recognition. He simply acknowledged it with a glance, calm and unbothered. Inside, the staff began to panic. The receptionist grabbed her phone, unsure if she should call someone or just vanish. Kyle swore under his breath, pushing past the others toward the door, suddenly looking very small inside his overpriced blazer. James approached with long strides, confusion and regret flickering across his face. He extended a hand with forced casualness, but there was a tremor behind it. "Shaquille," he said with a breathy chuckle. "Man, if someone had told me you were dropping by, we would have." "You weren't supposed to know," Shaq replied, voice like steel wrapped in velvet. James faltered. He withdrew the handshake slowly, running a hand through his close-cropped hair, glancing back at the building like it might offer an explanation for the fire he was now standing in. My team didn't recognize you," he asked, trying to gather the pieces. Shaq looked at him for a long moment. "Nope." James cleared his throat. "Didn't offer you a drive?"
Nope.
"They didn't." They saw a tall black man in a hoodie. That's all they needed to decide. James's mouth opened slightly, but closed again just as fast. There were no good answers to that. He looked toward the showroom, where his team now tried to act busy, fumbling with car keys and folders they didn't need. "I'm sorry," James said. Finally, "That's not how we operate." Shaq raised an eyebrow. "It's exactly how you operate when you're not watching." The words hit like bricks, not shouted, just placed, carefully, each one heavier than the last. James Carrington was no fool. He built Sterling Motors from the ground up, not just with capital but with brand vision. He prided himself on being progressive, inclusive, connected to the culture. He sponsored events, supported minority entrepreneurs, quoted Baldwin when it made him look sharp on panels. But here it was, in real time, the hole in the floor of his perfect empire, and the man pointing it out was someone whose name held more weight than any logo James had ever trademarked. "I want to talk inside," James said, gesturing toward the building. Shaq didn't move. "I don't." James paused. "I can fix this." "You can't fix something you didn't know was broken." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was indictment. Every car in that lot gleamed under the California sun, But the sparkle now looked sterile, like a cover-up. Shaq finally stepped forward, walking slowly past James, toward the building. But not inside. Just up to the glass wall. Through it, he could see Kyle watching nervously, shifting like a man already rehearsing apologies. Shaq tapped the glass once. Kyle flinched. Shaq didn't smirk, didn't gloat. He just let the weight of the moment land where it needed to. Turning back to James, Shaq said, "You built a place where people like me get told no before we say a word. That's not an accident. That's design." James looked down. For the first time, he didn't have the words. Shaq walked to the rear of the SUV, hand brushing over the hood of a car parked near the curb. It was one of the newer models Sterling Motors was known for. Custom everything, tech-loaded, powerful. He took it in for a moment, like someone appraising not just the car but the idea behind it. "You know what's funny?" Shaq said finally. "I wasn't even gonna buy anything. Just felt like walking through, seeing if the energy had changed." James stepped forward slightly. "And did it?" Shaq gave a small nod. Not affirmative, not negative. Just acknowledgement. Then he opened the Escalade's driver door, paused before getting in. "I don't need your apology, James. But your people? They need your attention, before someone walks in with less patience than me." Then he climbed inside, engine growling to life. James stood there, a silhouette in the SUV's side mirror, hands on hips, suit wrinkling from the pressure of realization. He had built a palace, but somewhere along the line, he'd forgotten to check who held the keys at the gate. Inside the showroom, Lila stood frozen behind the console. She had seen everything, and something in her gut told her that after today, this place would never be the same again. Not because Shaq had walked in and out, but because he'd shown them the mirror, and left them staring. And mirrors don't lie. They just wait for you to finally look. The silence was so thick, it could have cracked under its own weight. No one answered. Eyes darted. Feet shuffled. Lila stood behind the receptionist desk. Not part of the senior floor team, but very much alert, very much watching. James looked directly at Kyle. "You spoke to him. What happened?" Kyle hesitated. He came in without a scheduled appointment. No business card. Wasn't dressed like what? James cut in, his tone ice under pressure. "Like someone worth your time?" Kyle blinked. "That's not what I meant." James took a step forward. "Then say what you meant." Kyle faltered. He looked casual. There wasn't any indication he was serious. "A lot of people come in just to take pictures or sit in cars. So you assumed he didn't belong here?" Kyle hesitated, then nodded weakly. "I didn't recognize him. None of us did." James turned to the others. "Did anyone think to treat him like a potential client? Like a human being?" No response. "Did anyone ask his name? Offer him a brochure? Ask what brought him in?" Nothing. A few heads bowed. The silence answered louder than any apology could. James's voice dropped lower. He asked to test drive the graphite SUV. Kyle swallowed hard. "It's part of the display line. I told him it was unavailable." "And the black one?" James pressed. Kyle glanced at another associate, then back. "I said it was reserved." James nodded slowly. "Funny. That's the one I drove in yesterday. It's not reserved. It's not even tagged." Kyle looked away, the blood draining from his face. "That man built more than empires. He built trust. He's mentored more kids than you've sold cars. And when he walked through our doors, he was treated like a threat, like a joke." A few employees shifted uncomfortably, but James didn't flinch. "You all judged him on what he wore, on his silence, on the color of his skin. You looked at one of the most respected men in this country, and decided he wasn't worth your time because he didn't fit your checklist for who belongs here." One of the associates, a younger man named Brent, stepped forward awkwardly. "I didn't mean to disrespect him. We just didn't know." James turned on him. "That's the problem. You didn't want to know, you didn't try to know. And when you were faced with someone who didn't need to impress you, you dismissed him." Lila, still at her post, clenched her hands beneath the desk. James let the silence breathe again, then added, "He didn't have to be famous to deserve better. But the fact that he is, that makes this worse. You didn't just blow a sale, you blew the brand." Everyone stood stiff. Some looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. James finally exhaled and looked out toward the parking lot again. Shaq was gone. The SUV was gone. But the moment, it was burned into every inch of the showroom now. James turned back to the team and said, "I asked him, Why didn't you just say who you were? A pause. Everyone listening now, hearts pinned to that one sentence. And do you know what he said? The silence was louder now. He said, "If I had to say it, then what's the point?" The line landed like a gut punch. Nothing else needed to be said. Because that was it. That was the core of it all. In those 10 words, Shaq had dropped a mirror into the middle of Sterling Motors, a mirror none of them could look away from. James ran a hand across his face, looking older than he had when he walked in. This place was built to be different. He muttered, "It was supposed to be better than this." Then he looked at Kyle. "You're done. Pack your things." The sentence dropped flat, cold, and final. Kyle looked up in shock. "Wait, you can't be serious." James didn't blink. "I'm dead serious." Kyle opened his mouth but nothing came out. He looked around for support. There was none. Brent looked down. The receptionist stared at the floor. Lila stood still, finally stepping out from behind her desk. James turned to her. You were an intern, right?" She nodded. "Yes, sir." "You saw all of it?" "Yes." "Why didn't you speak up?" Lila's voice was steady. "Because I was taught that interns don't interrupt senior staff." James stared at her, and then, unexpectedly, his face softened, not with pity, but realization. "Well, that changes today," he said. "You want to stay? You'll report directly to me for the next 30 days, and you'll help me rebuild what just got exposed." Lila nodded once. Firm. "I'm in." James looked back at the team. This isn't a PR problem. This is a people problem. And it starts getting fixed today. Not with a speech. Not with a hashtag. With action. The team nodded slowly, shame thick in the air. As James turned toward his office, he paused. "And one more thing. Every client, from now on I don't care what they wear, who they come with, or what they drive, gets treated like they're somebody. Because they are. No exceptions." The meeting ended without applause, without relief, only silence. The kind that hangs in places after truth has come in and flipped the furniture. Outside, the sun still bathed the lot in gold. But inside Sterling Motors, the glow had changed. The shine wasn't in the chrome. It was in the cracks. The ones that finally let the truth break through. As the black Escalade rolled down the avenue and left Sterling Motors shrinking in its rearview mirror, the silence inside the cabin was deeper than the rumble of the engine. Shaq didn't play music. He didn't make a call. The only sound came from the soft click of the blinker when he turned onto a side street lined with palm trees and sun-glazed sidewalks. From the outside, he looked like a man on an ordinary drive through Los Angeles. But on the inside, the past had cracked open. The moment inside that dealership. Those cold stares. The casual dismissal. The hollow apologies. It didn't just sting because of who he was now. It stung because of who he had always been. And what he'd always carried. Because for Shaquille O'Neal, disrespect was never about one moment. It was about a lifetime of subtle reminders that your skin sometimes walks into a room before your name ever has the chance to. His hands gripped the wheel, loosely as his mind drifted. The sun caught the edges of his side mirror, and suddenly he wasn't in LA anymore. He was back in Newark, New Jersey. A kid again. Not 720. Not a multi-millionaire. Just Shawnee's boy. Lucille's son. The tall, quiet kid who people laughed at before they feared him. The one who'd been called every name but his own, by teachers who'd rather label him than understand him. He remembered sitting on a cracked gym floor, his knees practically up to his chin, too big for the space. Even then, he was maybe 10, maybe younger. A school janitor had walked in and asked, not unkindly but without thinking, "You here to clean up?" Shaq hadn't even known how to respond. He hadn't understood why it was funny until later, when a classmate told him, "He thought you were the new janitor's kid." He wasn't, but the assumption stuck. It always did. The flash moved again, this time to a high school locker room. The smell of sweat and soap, the echo of laughter and footsteps. He'd just finished a game, dropped 30 points and blocked everything in sight. The local paper had shown up late, and when the reporter came into the room, they shook hands with the white kid who hadn't played a single minute. "Great game," the reporter said, clicking his pen. "That's not him," someone else muttered. Shaq hadn't said a word. He'd just kept unlacing his sneakers. But even at 17, he knew what it meant. You had to fit the picture, and if you didn't, even greatness could go unnoticed. Back in the present, he made another turn, letting the Escalade coast toward the west side. He wasn't headed anywhere in particular. Sometimes, When your heart's full of noise, you just let the wheels decide. His mother's voice came to him then. Not loud, not demanding, just clear, like it had always been. Never let them decide your worth. She'd said it after a game in college. He couldn't remember the final score, but he remembered the sting. A professor had told him in front of the class that athletes were lucky they could shoot balls, because without that, most of you wouldn't pass freshman English. The room had gone quiet. Shaq hadn't reacted, but that night in his dorm he'd called his mom.
They see you as big, not bright.
She'd told him. But they don't see what's in your spirit. You do. That line had followed him like a shadow ever since. He pulled into a small parking lot near Baldwin Park and turned the engine off. The air was still. A family was setting up balloons under a picnic canopy nearby, laughing, shouting playfully. A little boy ran past the Escalade, chasing a blue ball, waving to Shaq with zero hesitation. Shaq smiled faintly and waved back. The kid didn't see a millionaire, didn't see a commercial icon or a cultural giant. He saw someone tall, someone who looked like joy. And that, for a moment, lifted the weight in Shaq's chest. He got out of the car and sat down on a bench under the shade of a wide oak tree. He looked out across the open space, remembering other open spaces, empty gyms, hotel rooms, after losses, courts in backyards where the hoop leaned left because nobody had the money to fix it. He thought of the first time he realized his body would always enter, before his voice did. It had been during a pickup game when he was 15. A white man in his 30s, a stranger, had told him, "I don't want to guard him. If he fouls, it's a lawsuit." Everyone had laughed, but Shaq didn't. He hadn't even touched the guy, but already his size, his presence, it was being translated into threat. Over the years, it happened in countless ways. Security guards following him in stores, even after he'd become a household name. Hotel clerks offering rooms on the other side, without realizing who he was. A neighbor once called the cops because he was standing outside his own house in sweatpants and a hoodie. Fame protected him sometimes, but only if people knew the name. Without it, he was just another black man made of myths and misunderstandings. And that was the wound the dealership had pressed. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and thought of the times he'd tried to push past the bitterness. He remembered a kid in Texas, maybe 11 years old, who'd come up to him and asked, "How do I get people to listen to me when they already think I'm trouble?" Shaq hadn't known what to say then. He just hugged the kid and told him to stay solid. But in truth, he hadn't had an answer. Even now, at this moment, he wasn't sure he did. He looked up at the sky, watched the clouds lazily stretch across the horizon. His breath slowed. He wasn't angry. He was tired. Tired of being tested just to be treated fairly. Tired of the double-take respect, the kind that showed up only after someone Googled your net worth. Tired of smiling through offenses small enough to be ignored by others, but sharp enough to pierce the soul. He thought of the young woman inside Sterling, the intern, the only one who said something. She didn't need to recognize him. She just recognized what happened. And that mattered. Maybe more than the apology from James Carrington. Because sometimes change doesn't come from the top. Sometimes it trickles up, from the people who are just beginning. Shaq stood, his shadow long on the concrete beneath the oak tree. He wasn't sure how long he'd been sitting, but the balloons were now floating high, and the family nearby was singing something upbeat around a cake. The laughter echoed, and for a moment it felt like medicine. He walked back to the Escalade and paused before getting in. He pulled out his phone, opened a blank note, and started typing. It wasn't a social post. It wasn't a press statement. It was just for him. Legacy isn't in what they say when they recognize you. Legacy is how you carry yourself when they don't. He saved it. No hashtags. No audience. Then he slid into the driver's seat and took one more look at the open park behind him. That moment at Sterling hadn't created a scar. It had just touched one that never really healed. But now, it had a name, a form, a truth. And with that truth came the power to decide what came next. Not just for him, but for every kid who'd ever be told to sit down, stay quiet, or wait their turn just because someone didn't see the fullness of their being. Shaq wasn't leaving the day behind him. He was carrying it forward with weight, with clarity, and with the calm strength of a man who knew exactly who he was, even when the world didn't. Inside the glass fortress of Sterling Motors, the air had shifted. It wasn't the temperature. It was something deeper, heavier, the kind of silence that doesn't follow embarrassment, but reckoning. The staff was quieter now, not because they were trying to be polite, but because something real had landed, something they couldn't pretend away or out-talk. James Carrington stood near the front reception, watching through the glass as Shaq's Escalade disappeared down the road, the sunlight catching the edges of its polished black body before it turned the corner and vanished. His shoulders dropped slightly. He'd tried to salvage the moment, tried to extend an olive branch. But what had just taken place on that pavement wasn't about patching things up. It was about peeling things back. He turned around slowly, back to the faces of his team, still gathered, still awkwardly in formation, like they were waiting for a verdict. But James wasn't in a courtroom. He was in his own house, and he'd just seen the cracks in his foundation clearer than ever before. Kyle, the smug-faced sales manager who had turned Shaq away, stood near the window with his arms folded, his lips twitching like he was still trying to frame his mistake as a misunderstanding. James saw it instantly, that defensive arrogance, that refusal to take full accountability. He'd seen that look before, in boardrooms where truth was inconvenient, in colleagues who apologized for racism with words like miscommunication and poor judgment. James knew what that look meant. He walked toward Kyle, slow but certain, not a single wasted motion. "Let's not drag this out," James said, his voice steady. "You're done." Kyle's arms unfolded. His face dropped. "Wait. What? You're serious?" "I'm serious," James said. "You embarrassed this company. You judged a man you should have welcomed. And you did it in front of the one person who didn't need your approval to prove anything. You disrespected someone whose reputation carries more weight than this entire dealership." Kyle's face flushed. "We didn't know who he was." "That's the problem," James snapped, the first real sharpness in his voice. "You only give respect when someone's already proven themselves to you. That's not how we operate. Not anymore." Kyle looked around for support. None came. Not from Brent, not from the receptionist, not even from Lila, the intern, whose eyes stayed steady and locked. James gestured toward the back hallway. "Clean out your desk. You've got 15 minutes. Kyle hesitated, jaw working, but he didn't argue. Not this time. He turned and left, footsteps louder than before, echoing against the glass like a warning. The others stood frozen, like they'd just witnessed something holy and brutal at the same time. James turned to the rest. "This place doesn't sell cars. It sells identity. It sells respect. If we don't give that to every single person who walks through those doors, then we're not just failing as salespeople, we're failing as people." The staff nodded, quietly. James turned to Lila. "Come with me." She followed him through the glass office doors, into the private wing that overlooked the entire showroom. It was a minimalist space. Black leather chairs, silver-framed photos of past celebrity clients, a wall-mounted screen showing inventory stats, and upcoming shipment schedules. But none of that mattered now. James sat behind his desk, cracked his knuckles once, then leaned forward. "You had eyes," he said. "You watched everything today. What did you see?" Lila didn't flinch. "I saw him treated like a stranger, a burden, and then I saw everyone realize he wasn't." James nodded. "And what did you see before you knew who he was?" She took a breath. "I saw a man who didn't need to prove anything, but everyone expected him to. I saw quiet confidence, presence, the kind that makes people uncomfortable when it's coming from someone they didn't expect it from." James looked down for a second, then met her gaze again. "Do you know why I started this place?" She shook her head. "Because I wanted to build a showroom that didn't just serve the wealthy, it respected them. That didn't just chase fame, it invited humility. I thought if I built something shiny enough, clean enough, high-end enough, it would speak for itself." He leaned back in his chair. "But today proved me wrong. A place is only as strong as the people inside it, and if my staff can't see value without a brand name stitched on a shirt, then I failed long before Shaquille O'Neal walked through my doors." He stood, walked toward the window. Outside, the sun was beginning to drift lower in the sky, casting shadows across the lot. "I want to offer him something," James said. "Not as a PR stunt, not as damage control, as something real." Lila stayed quiet, listening. "I want to invite him to help reshape this place, not just to partner with us, but to reimagine what luxury means, to create something bigger than just a dealership, something that opens doors for the kind of people we ignored today." He turned to her. "Do you think he'll go for it?" She considered her answer. "I think he's heard a lot of promises. I think he's watched a lot of people apologize without changing. But if it's real, If it's not just about money. I think he might listen. James nodded once, then he picked up his phone. He scrolled, searching through contacts, then hesitated. Let's do this right, he said. No assistant, no press release, just a message. From me. He typed slowly, carefully. Shaq, I messed up. Not by failing to recognize you, but by failing to build a place where you didn't need to be recognized to be respected. I don't want to fix this with a free car or a public statement. I want to do something bigger. Help me make this place better. For everyone. He stared at the screen for a long time. Then he hit send. The message was out. No takebacks. He looked at Lila, then smiled faintly. Now we wait. 2 days passed. Shaq didn't respond. Not at first. James checked his phone more than he liked to admit. He didn't call. He didn't follow up. He knew better than to push. Trust didn't respond to pressure. It responded to presence. Then on the third morning, just after the showroom opened, a quiet buzz rolled through the dealership. No cameras, no entourage, no warning. The Escalade was back. Shaq stepped through the front door, dressed the same way, hoodie, jeans, sneakers. This time, the silence wasn't awkward. It was respectful. He walked straight toward James, who was already waiting. You sent a message, Shaq said simply. James nodded. Meant every word. Shaq looked around the room. The energy was different. Not perfect, but softer. A little more aware. Eyes met his without flinching. No one looked away. You want me to partner with you? He asked. James nodded. Not just endorse. Build, create something that opens doors for people who never thought they were allowed in. Shaq thought for a long second. You're not asking me for a band-aid. No, James said. I'm asking for change. Shaq nodded. Then you're asking the right question. He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no. And sometimes the space between those two answers is where real change starts to breathe. That day, Sterling Motors didn't just lose an employee. It gained a future. One built not on chrome and gloss, but on a truth so powerful it didn't need to be shouted. Just lived. Exactly 1 week later. The corner of Melrose and Jackson looked and felt different. The same streets hummed with traffic. The same palm trees swayed under the April sun, and the chrome trim of Sterling Motors still glinted like it was dipped in money. But something fundamental had shifted, not just inside the building, but above it. Mounted high over the sleek glass facade was a new billboard, massive and bold. The background was jet black, the font sharp and modern. 3 words stretched across the space with quiet authority. Luxury, respect, for all. There was no logo on it, no car image, just the message. It didn't shout, it didn't beg. It simply existed, unmissable and unashamed. And that in its own right was louder than anything else on the block. Inside the dealership, the hum of business continued, but with a new rhythm. Gone was the cold stiffness that once defined the showroom. Now, there was movement, energy, conversation that didn't just echo off the marble, but felt rooted in something real. James Carrington stood by the glass, arms folded, taking it all in. His crisp navy blazer was the same as ever, but the man inside it had evolved. He wasn't just running a luxury dealership anymore. He was leading a reset. Near the entrance, a table had been added. Not a display, not a sales pitch. It was a community info station. Stacks of flyers detailed a new initiative launched that week. The Drive Forward Mentorship program. The concept was Shaq's, but the vision had already taken on a life of its own. 2 days after his quiet return, Shaq had walked back into the dealership. No press, no entourage, no announcement. He'd spent 3 hours inside, not talking about cars, not talking about money, talking about opportunity, access. What it meant to grow up outside the gates of places like this, and still believe you had a right to walk through them. By the end of that meeting, the decision was made. Sterling Motors would become more than a luxury showroom. It would become a pipeline. Each quarter, 10 young people from underserved communities across LA, high schoolers, GED earners, even adults returning to the workforce, would join a 6-month program designed to teach them the business of high-end automotive sales, finance, marketing, customer experience, and ownership. Not just how to sell a car, how to run a dealership, how to own what you once thought belonged to someone else. And at the heart of it all was the person who'd seen the change before it began, Lila. The intern who had stood silent during the initial encounter, who then stepped forward when it counted. Today she stood at a desk beside Shaq, clipboard in hand, running logistics for the first round of student interviews. She was no longer an intern. She was now Shaquille O'Neal's apprentice. It hadn't been a glamorous promotion. There were no viral posts, no big public announcement. But inside the dealership, the change was felt. Shaq had come in that morning dressed the same way he always did. Hoodie, jeans, sneakers. But now, nobody flinched. Nobody wondered if he belonged. They greeted him like they should have the first time. He moved through the building not like a celebrity, but like someone deeply invested. He asked about customers. He asked about back-end numbers. He took a call in the break room with a nonprofit director looking to bring kids from Inglewood into the mentorship program. He even laughed when Brent, the younger associate who once stayed quiet, told him nervously, "You're gonna end up owning this place if you're not careful." Shaq replied, "Ownership ain't the goal. Equity is." Those were the kind of lines that stuck. At 2:00 p.m. sharp, the first group of program applicants arrived. There were 7 of them today. 3 young men, 4 young women, none older than 22. They walked into Sterling Motors in button-ups and pressed pants, nervous but excited. They passed through the same glass doors that once silently denied others like them. But now those doors felt different. They weren't there to keep people out. They were open, held by hands that finally understood what it meant to be invited in. Shaq stood at the front, shook every one of their hands. No speech, no preaching, just presence. "Come in," he said. "We got a lot to learn from each other." The program was designed to be hands-on, shadowing sales staff, learning marketing analytics, understanding the mechanics under the hood, getting exposure to banking reps, auto lenders, insurance partners, and most importantly, being mentored by people who didn't just talk about success, but lived the struggle that came before it. Each mentee was paired with a mentor, not just employees, but people from the surrounding neighborhoods who had climbed into careers from non-traditional paths. There were no grades in this program, only growth. Later that afternoon, James joined Shaq in the corner office. They watched through the tinted glass as Laya led a small workshop with the mentees, explaining the customer experience journey from inquiry to purchase. She spoke with confidence now, her tone assured. James turned to Shaq. "You changed this place." Shaq shook his head. "I didn't change it. I just reminded it who it was supposed to be." James smiled. "You staying long term?" Shaq took a moment, looked out the window. "I'll stay as long as it's real." James nodded. "It is." Shaq turned to him. "Then we keep rolling." Outside, the sun was just beginning to lower, throwing long shadows across the lot. The new billboard caught the orange-gold light, the black background glowing against the sky like truth framed in fire. Luxury, respect, for all. Not just a slogan, not just branding, a promise. 1 week ago, that lot had been a symbol of exclusion. Now it was a platform for potential. The chrome still sparkled, the glass still shined, but now the real shine came from what was inside. The people, the purpose, and the partnership that rose out of a moment that could have ended in silence, but instead sparked a movement. Redemption didn't come with noise. It rolled in quietly. One lesson, one voice, one change, at a time. And for the first time, Sterling Motors wasn't just selling dreams. It was building them. The sun was sinking lower now, casting long shadows over the freshly buffed lot of Sterling Motors. The light hit the glass just right, soft golden, alive. Inside, the last of the mentees filtered out, laughing, their notebooks under their arms, dreams tucked a little tighter to their chests than when they'd walked in. The building no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like a space that breathed, a place where possibility didn't just sit on wheels under halogen lights, but walked on 2 feet, with ambition in their eyes, and real chances in their hands. From a rooftop angle, the scene below looked almost cinematic. Stillness blended with motion. Cars gleamed, doors opened and closed, voices rose with purpose. But hovering over it all was a quiet presence. Shaq. He stood near the edge of the lot, one hand resting casually on the hood of a sleek matte SUV. His eyes weren't on the car, they were on the people. The way they moved now, the way they held their heads. And then his voice, not to anyone around him, but as if through air, through time, through us. "You know, people think this whole thing started with a car." His voice was low, rich with the weight of reflection. "They think I walked in, got turned away, and it lit a fire. But it's not about that. It was never about the drive, not the engine, not the keys, not even the title. A slow, subtle pan across the showroom, now alive with life, staff speaking to customers like equals. Lila guiding a new hire through the digital kiosk. Laughter over coffee at the client lounge. It was about what we carry when we walk into a room. Shaq continues. And what meets us there, or doesn't. The scene cuts back. Shaq standing alone again. This time with the sky behind him turning to that soft LA lavender. I've been overlooked, misread, doubted. Not just before the fame, but after it too. 'Cause to some people, a hoodie means don't trust him. A quiet man means he's hiding something. And skin like mine? A pause. Well, that's its own assumption altogether. He starts walking, slow and grounded, through the lot. But I didn't come to prove myself. I came to see what this place really was, what it could be, and maybe I didn't know that myself till it hit me. Cut to James, watching through the window. Not managing, not inspecting, just watching with respect. And it did hit me. Not like a slap, more like a mirror, one I couldn't look away from. Now we see moments in still frames. Kyle walking out that day, cardboard box in hand, the mentorship board going up. A teenager in a hoodie getting shown under the hood of a luxury sedan. Shaq keeps walking. Everybody's fighting to be seen. Not for the flash. Just for the fairness. For the courtesy. The humanity. Cut to a close-up of Lila. Not the intern anymore. Not the observer. The doer. A mentor now. A symbol of what it means to step up when no one else does. This place was never just about cars. It was about who gets the keys. And who never even gets asked if they want to drive. He pauses at the edge of the lot, looking at the new billboard overhead. Luxury, respect, for all. It's a start, that's all it is. But a start's better than silence. Then. You know, people always say the world doesn't change overnight. He smiles slightly. They're right, but sometimes, something shifts. Even just a little. Someone tells the truth when it's easier to look away. Someone gets a second chance to do the right thing. Final slow pan, customers coming and going. New mentees arriving. A father and daughter walking into the dealership together, pointing at a car with matching grins. Shaq turns toward the camera, like he's not just speaking to the moment, but to us. And when that happens, when somebody finally lights that fuse, he walks toward his SUV, opens the door. You better believe the world's gonna feel the heat. The door shuts, the engine hums to life. As he drives off, the camera holds on the lot, bright alive, no longer guarded, but welcoming. Then tilts up to the billboard once more. Luxury. Respect. For all. Fade out. End. Think it was just about a car? Think again. Stories like this don't end. They evolve. If this hit you somewhere deeper, you're exactly where you're meant to be. Stay with us because what's coming next, it's bigger than the game.